It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. Today, my guest is Jon Abbott, President and CEO of GBH, America's leading multi-platform creator for public media, and the largest producer of content for PBS and partner to NPR and PRX. A nationally recognized public media leader, Jon has transformed the way GBH creates and distributes diverse educational content to millions of Americans throughout New England and across the nation. He joined GBH in 1998 and was named President and CEO in 2007. Prior to that, he served as Senior Vice President for Development and Corporate Relations at PBS and in senior management positions with San Francisco public station Kqed. He began his broadcasting career back in 1981 at Columbia University station WKCR-FM. Jon holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Columbia University and an MBA from Stanford. He's a member of the boards of PBS, National Public Media, and an elected member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the recipient of the John Jay Award from Columbia University, and he currently lives in Boston. Jon Abbott, welcome into the corner office.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a real privilege.
It's great to hear your voice again. We spoke a couple of months ago, and we've been super busy as we've got through the year, into the year, and we're now, mid-February already. I can't even believe it. Almost at the end of February. I'm not sure exactly when this will be airing, but great to get caught up with you and, want to hear about the story. And you've had a really incredible one as you've gone through the public broadcasting world. But we like to always start at the beginning and hear a little bit about kind of the early life, and tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what your early family life was like.
Oh, well, I grew up in New York City. I'm a definite urban kid.
Manhattan?
Yeah, in Manhattan, on the Upper West Side, above the Columbia University campus.
Awesome.
My dad was involved for many, many years at Barnard College, the women's college.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
And so I was, and Dad was so involved there, and it's a wonderful neighborhood.
Yeah.
But I always liked to, and then I grew up in the city, went on and actually went to college at Columbia. So I like to tease.
Never really left the neighborhood.
Right. So I like to tease that I was both a townie and a gownie. So
I love it.
If I was trying to find my way around that neighborhood and needed to cut through a back alley somewhere, I kind of knew it all by the back of my head. So
do it all by hand. It was brothers and sisters growing up?
I had a sister. She actually, a part of my growing up was a circumstance where she unfortunately we lost her when I was young. I was 18, she was 16. She had something called Marfan syndrome, and we grew up together, and it was a really good family life, and sorry to have lost her when she was 16. But no, we were a wonderful family.
Mom worked from the home, or did she have outside?
She did. Well, actually, my mom was. I loved watching Mad Men.
See the advertising world.
Yeah, exactly. I realized that my mother was in. She was born in 1924, so she was in this vanguard. She was a firstborn into a family in Vermont that probably won't surprise your listeners. Back then, there was a lot that was expected of sons in families, but
Sure.
not much of daughters.
Yeah. Yeah.
That wasn't the way my mom was going to think about life.
Mm.
And she found her way through college and to a master's in food science and to New York City, and loved New York City just like
Wow.
my dad did. My dad grew up as a tenant farmer in Southwest Missouri.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah,
Gosh, he was an immigrant as well. Yeah.
yeah. So both my parents had a kind of rural thing. My mother grew up on a dairy farm,
Yeah.
and both arrived in New York City. And my mom was when I watched Mad Men, I realized I think my mom was Joan.
Modeled after a real
Yeah,
character.
no, I
I
mean, I
love it.
love the writing. I mean, I just realized because then
Uh,
later in life, she would show me pictures of these advertising shoots, and she ran the test kitchen for Women's Day magazine, and she was on tele. I never knew some of the things she was on television
that's
sets,
awesome. That's so
and
cool.
then so Mad Men comes along, and I realized she always had a word for kind of what she and this very tight knit group of professional women accomplished and put up
Sure.
with. And in a way, I loved watching Mad Men because at that stage of my mom's life, she was in her 90s or late 80s,
Yeah.
and I
Did
loved
she
that.
watch it? Did she enjoy the show?
I did. I took her. We watched a couple of episodes together,
Yeah. Yeah.
and she looked at me. She goes, "Yeah, yeah."
That's what it was like.
Yeah, she goes, yeah, it's pretty close. I can tell you some other stories, but maybe,
Yeah, they kind of got the top lines right. Yeah.
maybe I won't. But I will say it. I guess you learn this, as you get a little further on in your own life and raise your own kids and have your own career, you have a kind of special respect for what your parents navigated to get where
Right.
they got
Right.
and to
Right.
make possible for you what they made possible. So.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic, great. Well, what are some of those kind of early lessons? I mean, I'm assuming Dad came to New York because of the job at Barnard, right? Or did he come earlier than that?
Yeah, that's it. My dad was born. I was in my dad's second family, so he was born
Okay.
in 1907. He would have been
All
this November. He would have been 115 years old.
right.
So it was a little bit like being raised by your grandparents. And
Interesting. Yeah,
to me, I always felt that I came to recognize that as a kind of special gift because
yeah,
he'd
yeah.
already, in fact, I'm very close to my half brothers, and
Right.
they have shared with me how the way when Dad got a second shot at raising a family,
Mm,
time had passed, and his view of what being a dad was like was going to be different, and man,
yeah.
different,
Right.
and
Right.
they always tease me that I got the better dad. And
Yeah, it's funny. I can identify with that. I have older brothers that are 10 and 7 years older. Same mother, but they look at how he treated me and how he treated them and go, "You're a lucky dude."
Yeah, I don't know. So I get a lot of that. But he was the first in his family to go to college, and he went to what was then Springfield State Teachers College. It's now
All right.
Missouri State,
That's right. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
he worked and then put his brother through college. They were the first two in the family to go to college, and then he pretty much just nipped in and escaped. Pretty much got ahead of the depression and got to Montclair. I think it was Montclair College or Montclair State College, and taught accounting and
Oh,
coached sports and things, and then got his master's and his EDD at Teachers College. And gosh, my great admiration for my dad is he worked like a lot of us feel about our parents. Hopefully, worked extraordinarily hard
yeah.
to make a big journey in life
Yeah. Yeah.
to advance from what was a really hard life for them in Missouri. So
Create a better life for his
yeah,
progeny.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think that was always that lens of where he was from and what how he looked at life.
He
As
approached
a
it. Yeah.
result, always it was his lens, and that was gratefully a lens that I never lost sight of. So
Awesome.
yeah,
Awesome.
so we grew up on the Upper West Side in an apartment. Dad and Mom never, as everyone else was heading to Westchester and
Right.
Scarsdale and Larchmont and heading to the suburbs. My parents were in a rent-controlled apartment right there on the campus, and they paused and said, "No, we kind of like
That's where you want to
sputtering
stay.
around the
Yeah.
neighborhood." And
Yeah.
I I loved that part of growing up because it was, New York in the late '60s, '70s, '80s, and it was a wild and vibrant place.
Awesome.
Pretty
Awesome. Great.
exciting place to grow up. Yeah.
Great place to be. Now, the next question is purely academic, and I don't mean to play on words, but you went to Columbia and went on to Stanford. So I assume you were a pretty good student going through elementary, middle school, and high school.
That is a good question. I will be honest with you. I started and in at PS 36 and then PS
Oh,
125, and it was a period. And I I have a great passion for public education in this country. I will say that those were tough years, and
yeah.
the environment was it was not an environment that was conducive to at least helping me figure out that I was capable of being a good student and capable of sitting still in class. So um, I ended up, learning a little bit more about, pecking order in classrooms and things like that. To be very frank, and then, but I ended up getting a break, and my dad kind of put the let out, and I went to a school called the Cathedral School, which is at
Oh,
Cathedral St. John the Divine, and
private.
yeah,
Catholic of Catholic background?
that's Episcopal school, but not
Fiscal?
non-denominational. We had kids from
Right,
all
right.
over. It's a really wonderful place, and
Mm. And
kind
that
of
was for high school.
no, that was for grade school,
Oh, grade school. Okay.
starting in like fourth grade, and
Yeah.
it was there where it was about a year of kind of deprogramming for me. I was about a year into it when I never forgot a dear teacher just pulled me out of a class and just grabbed me. I don't think you could do that these days, but
No, no.
she grabbed me by the shoulders. I adored her. Grabbed me by the shoulders and just said, "I know you can do this work. I believe
Mm,
you can do this work, but unless
mm.
you believe you can do this work, it's not
The
going to happen.
work's not going to get done.
It's not going to get done." And she just really, so for about a year and a half, she and then some teachers that followed basically got me to a point where I could believe that I could put the time in and be a good student. So
Mentored you along.
yeah,
Wow.
the cathedral
Fabulous.
was a lot of people talk about their high school years. For me, the primary school years were the place
Formative.
where I hit the groove, and
Yeah.
yeah, I was a good solid student, but more so solid student because I realized if you put the time in more often than not, if you apply yourself, good things can happen. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that worked, and then went on to high school, and then yeah, I was lucky enough to go to Columbia. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So other activities? Did you involve in sports? Growing up in Manhattan and going through school, one assumes, oh well, they probably didn't have football games
Yeah,
or
yeah,
anything
yeah,
else.
yeah.
But there really is quite an active environment. I've known quite a few folks that have done that. And did that take up some of your attention? To other things that you were involved with, public speaking, perhaps, or other types of things?
Yeah, no, I was so when I went to the interesting thing about the cathedral school was, and kind of the way that my parents could afford it, was they were one of two schools left in New York City that actually had a full-time choir. And that
Oh,
you
cool.
literally, if you auditioned and made it, you and I would say this is one of my best friends who remained so all my life was doing this with me. If you auditioned and made it, you were in the choir and you sang literally 6 days a week. You rehearsed twice a day, Monday
Wow.
through Friday. You sang even song every night at 5:15, Monday through Friday, and then you spent all Sunday at church, rehearsing, singing morning mass, going to lunch, doing your homework, singing even song, and then you were home. So it was pretty rigorous schedule
Wow. That
alongside
20,
schoolwork.
30 hours a week, it sounds like. My
Oh
gosh.
yeah,
Like
it
a
probably
part-time
yeah,
job.
probably at least yeah no
Yeah, yeah.
and I know it's a I think it's kind of an essential part of my story because the my friend Larry Harris, who I did this with and has remained very tight with me for a long time. It was a lot to it, and but what happened was for both of us, and he was a kid from the South Bronx. If you did this, the school covered half your tuition.
Ah,
So
very
yeah,
good.
so like
Wow.
when
Big
audition
incentive.
yeah,
Yeah.
so when audition time came around, my father my mother said, "You're going to audition for the choir."
We have a plan for you.
Yeah,
And this is what it includes.
they said, "We think you can sing, and your job." They said, your job is to prove to them that you can sing, and you got to get into that choir. So I luckily did that, and
That's
so
awesome.
singing. So actually, a lot of my so singing, music were a big part of my growing up, and then uh, yeah, not much baseball or football in Boston, in
Yeah,
New York
right,
City, but
right.
a lot of basketball,
Yeah, yeah.
and and the field, that you could find fields large enough to play softball. So yeah, no, I love sports and sports and music, and
I
pretty
love it.
active. Yeah.
So you went on to Columbia. We talked about that. You studied political science, and yet the arc of your career, really your entire career, has been public broadcasting. We'll get to that in a moment. So did you have other ambitions at that stage? Did you think that political science might take you into an international career, or what were your thoughts as you chose that major?
That's a great question. I In high school I loved urban politics. I mean, having
Mm,
been in the city, and New York City was going
yeah.
through, right. This was that window of time where the city was
Oh my
basically,
gosh, in the early '80s. Oh,
yeah,
high crime and
starting
lots
in
of issues.
76 and 77, declaring bankruptcy, and
Right, right.
the rest of the country. I mean, famous New York Post, I think, or Daily News headline: Ford to city, drop dead. Um, that, that pretty much uh,
Described it. Yeah.
it illustrated to everybody in New York City that it was us against the world. I mean, that with it,
Was it Ed Koch? Who would have been the mayor in your college days?
I'm pretty sure when that happened, it was Abraham Beam, Abe Beam,
Oh yeah, yeah,
and
right,
then
right.
you're right, Ed Koch got elected and was kind of part of that
About that same time,
window of
right?
renaissance. But it was definitely a kind of us against the world thing. You talk to anybody growing up, like Spike Lee, hear him
Yeah,
talk about growing up in Brooklyn. Um, if you were there, especially New Yorkers always feel that way, but if you were there in that window of time, everybody had really was taking
written it off.
New York for gone, and
Yeah, that's right.
so I think it it made you couldn't have that and all the things the city was going through and not be fascinated with that's all you knew, right?
Right,
You just
right.
knew that this was the way the world struggled to work. So when I
Yeah.
got so in high school, I did a lot with urban politics,
Oh,
history, and then yeah, I got to Columbia, and there was a really strong political science department and a remarkable professor, a woman named Esther Fuchs, who I took a couple classes with my first year and a half, and then I basically said, "God, I love everything that And
mm,
I looked at the catalog, and so I joke with Professor Fuchs now, having seen her a couple of years ago. I said, I took every one of your classes. She
she said,
ultimately,
"Yeah, I remember."
yeah, she did, and she actually was my thesis advisor, and
Ah, sweet,
yeah, no,
cool.
it was a good situation, and but I think it was mostly just because it was the world, it was a window onto the world I had
Yeah,
lived, and was
yeah,
trying to make
awesome.
sense. Yeah,
Now, did you work a couple of years before you went to Stanford?
yeah, no, actually, the work thing. So if I'm connecting my dots, so I
Yeah,
had the choir work, right,
right,
coursework,
sure,
and then I go to a private high school in New York as well, because at that point, so right, then New York City was fiscally failing, and I
right.
got into Stuyvesant, the wonderful public
Oh
high
yeah,
school there, and
right.
was all set to go. And then they were announcing that there would be no music programs, no sports, no arts, right? And
Wow.
nobody knew what that experience would be like. So my dad and mom panicked again, and they enrolled me in a private school. But then I got a speech from my dad that time saying, "Okay, well, we can figure out a way to pay this tuition, but we can't afford, anything else. So
Right.
uh, clothes, fun, frolic, that's on you." And
It's on
so,
you. Yeah.
yeah, so that fall, a freshman year, my dad came to me and said he had a buddy who he played tennis with, and he said, Paul would like to see you for an interview. And I knew
Hmm,
Paul. Paul ran an import export business.
okay. All right.
So in New York City, and they kind of operate on the margins in New York City, but basically working with international tour groups that come to town and
Oh,
uh, buy materials in the states, and they get it tax free, and then they basically a duty free shop basically.
duty free shopping. Yeah.
And
Right. Cool.
and the wild thing about this one was, so I go in an interview with Paul, and ostensibly to work Christmas vacation my freshman year. And Paul puts a lot of, it was a great, I think he like put all the decorum into it as an interview, I think just to humor my father. And he says, all right, John, you've got the job. Here's Gabriella. You're going to report Monday. And I go, oh, okay, great. Good. And uh, 3/4 of the work at that place, this is what was wonderful about it, was done in Spanish, actually.
Wow. Now, this is still during high school, correct?
Yeah.
Or
Oh, yeah.
this is,
I was 14 years old. And,
yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
yeah.
Barely in high
And
school.
and I worked at the electronics counter, so that was kind of fun for kids. So we sold cameras and stereos and film and calculators back then, and hair
Right.
dryers. I mean, a little bit of everything. And
Yeah.
but we did most of the work not in English, and most
Wow.
of my fellow kind of staff members, they were all first generation immigrants, and
Cool.
all over Latin America. And so I finished this great Christmas break with a check in my pocket. And my dad said, "How's that feel?" I said, "Well,
It feels good.
it feels good." He said, he'd already helped me open my bank account, and so he goes, "Are you
Nice.
going to deposit that?" I go, yes, sir." And he goes, "That felt good." I said, "Yeah, it felt good." He said, "Well, why don't you talk Paul, see if they've got openings on the weekends?"
Ah,
And next
step
thing
me
I
up.
knew, he'd already cooked with Paul.
Of
And
course.
next thing I knew, I was working every weekend and every school vacation through high school and through my junior year in college.
Wow. Fantastic.
Yeah, but I've said this to my two daughters. I still think for a young person, if you work retail, better still to work retail with people coming in from all over the world. I think working retail, standing on your own 2 feet and meeting lots of different people and reacting to them and figuring out how to connect and communicate with them is the best experience a young
Fabulous.
person can have.
Fabulous. My first job was in retail, also at 14, selling
Yeah,
kids clothes. But
right.
you're absolutely right. You learn about stocking, you learn about communications, you learn to take disappointment, right? When people don't like you deal with people that are not happy. You got
Yeah,
to figure out how to
right.
stay happy with them.
Yeah, you're so used to a life with your parents, your
Yeah.
siblings,
Yeah.
and school that is sequenced with teachers who, like you said, are they happy or are they not? Am I doing what I need
Right.
to? But it's very linear.
Yeah,
Whereas
that's true.
when you go into retail, like you just said, all of a sudden, every 4 minutes, the mood,
Another
every
reaction.
four
Yeah.
minutes, the mood can change. And
That's right.
yeah,
That's right.
you kind of really figure out how to live outside yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
And,
Fantastic.
yeah, I've always found, and when I meet kids who, I'm doing interviews with or coaching for their careers and things they're thinking about, I'm always fascinated when I connect with. I think I can pretty well tell when a kid's taken a bunch of jobs and has done some retail.
Yeah, had that background. So the time between Columbia and Stanford was then with them, or did you do
No,
other things?
no. So I applied to business school right out of. So I had done at Columbia. I basically had this great break. I got involved with the radio station,
Okay, all right.
WKPR, which was predominantly a jazz station. And the good fortune of having a dad as old as my dad is, we didn't listen to. I didn't. I'm not sure I listened to any rock and roll until
Growing up, right?
until I was like 14 and could afford my own stereo. So there was one stereo, just like it was one TV. And so up until honestly till I was 14, the stereo was dad's, and so basically the music I listened to with my dad was his music, which was jazz.
Right, sure.
And the best part about that was, and I thanked him years later, but I went into Columbia and all the upperclassmen, they give you this test when you go in your freshman year, and everyone is of course angling for a show. And what the upperclassmen love doing is basically giving you this test and flunking everybody. Because back then you were ready to tell them all about the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Led
Yeah,
Zeppelin,
yeah,
right?
right, right.
Maybe Frank Zappa, but they gave you this question, like 10 questions, and I got 9 right about jazz.
Wow,
And
wow.
I remember they came into the lounge. They said, "The rest of
How
you."
did you cheat?
Exactly. So they said, "Look at everyone else," and they go, "All right, come back in the spring. You guys all flunked. You, who are you?" said to me, he said, "Did you have a brother who went
How'd
here?
you know this stuff?
How'd you get
Yeah.
the test?" And it was like
I
a
love
moment
it.
of great pride because
Yeah.
no, I know those answers. I said, I've been going to listen to the music and going to the clubs with my dad since I was like 11 years old. And they go,
Yeah.
they didn't believe me. So they literally broke out like the prior year's test. They gave me another 10 questions, and I think I got 8 right. And I said, I don't think you have any choice but to give me a show now.
I
So
love it. I
yeah,
love it.
so I interned with a wonderful guy who's a wonderful writer now, a guy named Ashley Kahn, who's written beautiful books on Coltrane and Miles Davis and the history of Impulse Records. And Ashley, was my mentor. And yeah, soon I had a show,
I
and then
love it.
the Blue Note Jazz Club opened, and I got dragged down there by the station manager, an upperclassman who didn't want to do the work, and I was down for 3 years every Friday night recording and broadcasting live music from the Blue Note for 3 years.
Love it.
So
Love it.
yeah, so I got, I really, I got kind of the bug
Yeah.
at WKCR, and so I applied to business school, believe it or not, and the dean there at Stanford still laughs about this. I applied saying, "Oh, I want to do this public broadcasting thing," and I must have been the fish out of water they were looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
and they accepted me, but they said at the time, they said, "Hey, it's rare for a kid to come out of college, come right to school. We'd like you to get a couple years of experience."
Okay.
So
Got it.
yeah,
Got it.
so I
It
worked.
was their recommendation.
Yeah, so here's the best part of that is I worked for a couple of years at Pete Marwick Mitchell, one of the big eight.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Yeah, sure.
yeah. Now, and no disrespect, but I can tell you, I put on a suit and went into an office environment for those 2 years. Loved the people, but I can tell you about 4 months into it, I said, "Oh my God." I'd come out of working in basically a creative environment in this radio station. And the juxtaposition, I just said to myself, "Oh my God, if I go to work and have to sit in a cubicle one more time,
I'm going to kill myself.
I'm going to kill myself." My brain, I mean, it was like, "Oh my God."
It's
And
such
yet,
a different world.
oh my. And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
basically what I had learned in college producing all this, so I was in class and then working with these artists who we had a great relationship with the jazz community. And I basically, the lesson I learned, and then the juxtaposed with the time of Pete Mark was, whoa, what I love is being around creative people.
yeah,
And
yeah,
if I could just figure out a way to be around, if I can make myself valuable and do some things around these creative people, um, gosh, this is much more fun to hang around with these people,
sure. Yeah, awesome.
than to balance ledgers. So yeah, so that was my lesson, and I went to Stanford 2 years later,
Yep, yep.
and at the and then summer was approaching between first and second year. Everyone else running off to consulting firms and investment banks and such. And
Right,
I
sure.
knew that was there I was at my crossroads saying, well, that's kind of not me.
Yeah,
And
that's not what I want to do.
so I met the president of KQED in San
Oh,
Francisco,
fantastic.
and
One of
he's
my favorite stations, by the way. I spent a
no,
lot of time in the Bay
uh,
Area and
it may
love KQED.
it may be it's with all due respect to my station, it may be the finest public radio station in the country,
Mm,
or at least it's
yeah.
one of the two finest stations.
There we go. There we go.
But he had this remarkable notion. He was looking out at the development of public radio, and he said, "We have." He came down to speak at Stanford. There were like only 4 of us who came to his talk, and I went up to him afterwards, and he said, "Well, come up." And I said, "I'm looking for summer work," and he said, "Well, come up and meet with me." So
Huh.
he said, I've got this concept, and I just need somebody to dig into it deeply.
Mm,
If you want to come here for the summer, we think that public radio is at a point where there's enough content that the trajectory is that public radio news is going to be a thing.
wow.
And
Wow. This is the late 80s, right? We're in
it's
80, 87, 88,
summer of 87. And he
87.
said, your job in 10 weeks is to study the environment and write a business strategy for us and tell us if you think we can switch to an all news format, the first in the country.
Wow. Wow. What insight he had,
Yeah, no,
huh?
yeah, a guy named Tony Tiano in all fairness,
Incredible.
and
Wow.
and I had to
Wow.
turn in weekly reports, but I got to know everybody, a lot of really remarkable people in public media and public radio, and I kept, producing, all, a format strategy, marketing plan, financials, the whole bit,
Fantastic.
and yeah, wrote this business plan, and was 7 weeks in, and he came to me, he says, "Can we have your final report next week?" And I said, I was getting
You
paid.
gave me 10 weeks.
Exactly. I was thinking, you got right to the end of it. I was getting paid $500 a week, and I was like,
Yeah, I want to stretch this out a little bit more.
exactly. I looked at, I said, Tony, I will give you exactly what you need. Yes, I can be done in 8 weeks, but then I said, like, pause. But will you pay
Yeah.
me for week 9 and
Yeah.
10?
Can I hang out and do something
Yeah,
else?
yeah. He said, "Oh yeah, yeah." No, he says, "No problem. I just need it." And I go, "Well, can I ask why so soon?" He goes, "Well," and this is what it was kind of marvelous. Kind of my break was,
Mm.
you may recall that was when the Iran Contra hearings were going
Oh, of course.
on,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
KQED had gone wall to wall with the Iran Contra hearings, like other public radio stations had.
Sure.
But KQED, Tony had the wisdom to say, "Okay, this is our chance," because when it's not like we're going to turn off the music one day. We've already turned off the music.
Right.
And because all public radio stations, most were a mix of
Covering it. Yeah.
music and
Yeah.
news at that point.
Right.
And
Right.
he said, and I said, "So why now?" He goes, "Well, we don't know when the hearings are going to end, and we're not. We've read your stuff. We're going to do it. We're not going back." And I've called a special
Wow.
board vote, and we're going to go do it. So they made the decision in like mid-August that they were going to go all news, and then ironically, the Iran Contra hearings didn't end until like late September, early October,
Mm.
if I recall. But anyway, they went all news, and then the cool thing for me was I basically said to him, "Hey, you want some help implementing this?" And so I had this beat up old Volvo, and and I was in this Stanford class of high flyers, but I knew I was the fish out of water. So I basically second year moved all my classes to the morning, and at like 12, I'd run to the parking lot
Right.
into this beat up old Volvo and tear up 280 and pull into the parking lot at KQED as fast as I could, almost like I was just there halftime, right?
Right.
And
Sure.
yeah, so then I spent that whole year implementing it, and yeah,
Wow.
and then
Fabulous.
when I graduated, they figured out a way to. Yeah, they weren't hiring many MBAs in public broadcasting at that time, but I guess
Particularly from Stanford, I can imagine,
I
right?
guess I'd made myself useful enough that they could that they took a flyer on me, and I'm
Well,
grateful.
that's fabulous. That's fabulous. And 35 years later, you're still in public broadcasting. Amazing career. When did you know you really loved it, John?
I, I honestly, the two ingredients for me, like I said, was being in a creative environment. And the great thing about the public radio environment, public media environment, is the bond between a community, between the station and its audience, right? So in
Yeah.
New York,
Yeah.
it was the jazz community, the Harlem community, and the relationship and feedback you got from an audience that wasn't getting it anywhere else, and really had this bond of trust and engagement. So that's a great feeling for anybody
Right.
to have any kind of customer relationship where it's that fulfilling.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
being around creative people, and then secondly, I was just saying a mission. Mission centered, purposeful
Mm,
work.
yeah.
Um, I knew I was, it wasn't going to be about making a lot of money for me, but gosh, the thought that I could come to work and be amazed by the people around me and proud
Mm,
of what I was part of contributing to, and very much in community, part of any community I was living in and part of, that was very fulfilling.
yeah. Fantastic. Well, you came to WGBH back in '98, but you had a short stint well, not a short stint, about 6 years at PBS.
Yep.
Tell us about that, direction. Did you move back to the East Coast to join them, or did you stay out west? And tell us a little bit about that interlude.
So what went on there was, the interesting thing that was also happening in the public broadcasting world is, we're the last public broadcasting, public media. We're the last locally owned, operated, and governed media in America. We're really a
Right.
federated
Right.
system, right? So,
Yeah.
so it's very bottom up, not very top down. And so
Right.
here, so coming out of business school, the first thing the tension you recognize is you love the fact that you're on the ground and connected to community. But the other challenge is if you're looking at the balance sheet and the income statement and the operations, you wrestle with what's the forecast you have for scale, and where do you get scale? And and I had a window at KQED onto whether it was the advent of fundraising databases or the advent of the new at that point what we call computer technology. Now we call digital technology.
Right,
But
right.
a lot of these solutions, as accomplished as KQED was, it was really apparent to me that some of the bigger solutions in building momentum for public television, public radio, was going to be tied to the way in which stations scaled and did things together. And
Interesting.
so PBS had done a study of the things that had to change in the way it fundraised and made its case around the country, and basically identified kind of a body of practices that they recognized that if all stations could adopt together, that we could accelerate scale and resource development and fundraising.
Yeah,
So I moved
yeah.
back to Washington to work at PBS, but basically I was on the road all the time,
Mm.
working with stations around the
Through all the
country.
local stations. Huh?
Yeah,
Yeah.
around these concepts, and
Huh.
we ended up launching a company and built. We actually ended up launching we collaborated with a company in Cambridge, Massachusetts that Target Software, and we built the largest in Oracle at the time,
Mm.
the largest relational database software for the most popular among large-scale nonprofits outside of hospitals and universities.
Oh,
Yeah,
cool.
we built it for public broadcasting, and then the company in Cambridge then spun it out and used it for environmental nonprofits and health
Yeah,
nonprofits. But all because there were these scaled platforms like the Oracle tool set that could allow you to do things in new ways. And it was, to me, it was a nice marriage of the things I'd kind of
yeah,
tackled in business
yeah,
school with trying to bring those concepts into the nonprofit sector.
yeah. What motivated your decision then to join the operating folks
Uh,
at WGBH?
Well, I mean, GBH is I everything I seem to do at PBS. If I wanted a beta station to do it well with, basically every time, including on the software project, I basically came to the conclusion I had to do it with GBH because they just had the best, just had remarkable people, and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
could count on
You
them.
met them. You met them through the PBS
Yeah.
experience, I
So
presume.
all
Yeah,
the
yeah,
PBS
yeah.
experience, I had worked with them on 4 or 5 projects, and the president of GBH at the time, Henry Beckton, got to know me. And at the time, my wife and I had 2 small children, and I was living on a plane all the time. And we kind of decided, hey, um, we'd like to live in a community that where we actually drop our kids off at school and
Huh.
and stay, right.
Right,
And
right.
and so the kids were young enough that it just made sense. And to be honest, back to my point about what I loved about the community connection for public broadcasting, I just love the notion that when Henry called me and said, because digital television was coming, he just said, I'd like you to come and be our general manager,
Mm,
move this future of digital television into our plans, and it ended up being the right time for our family, and I
awesome.
love the notion that I could go back to
Yeah,
like I was in San Francisco and like I was in New York, building something in Boston,
yeah.
and
Attached to the local.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and the
yeah.
best part is raise my family here and and know that I could connect my kids to a whole set like I was raised in New York, but
Sure.
connect them to a whole set of wonderful experiences in the wonderful city of Boston. So it was a privilege to come to GBH. They were, we're the largest producer of PBS children's programs and general
Yeah.
audience programs, and so pretty great place to do the work, and it was the right time for me to make a move like that.
What do you think's most unique about the culture of GBH?
Well, the great thing about, speaking of kind of scale or scope again, the nice thing about GBH, and I guess I transposed this from earlier lessons, is we're about 850 employees, and
It's a big group.
yeah,
You're one of the largest local stations. I
yeah,
mean,
we're the
in the
largest,
nation. Yeah,
and
yeah,
so there was an. I think we are at our heart, we're a creative and content company,
yeah, yeah. Right,
and so um, yes, broadcasting at that time was the mode of distribution, but I think GBH thought less about the method of transport and distribution, and a lot more, because it was such a creative company, about the content. And
right.
so the essence of GBH, it was easier to keep that creative juice at the center of the organization, and thus
Sure.
the mission. And then when you're trying to build, it's not just great producers and storytellers, but a remarkable team of people around them, whether they're in finance or marketing or technology or
Right, right.
fundraising, right? And so to build when you've got enough great creative stuff happening, and you're trying to hire top people in those other functions, HR, finance, technology, right, marketing, they love being around all that great work. So I think
Yeah,
the culture
sure.
of GBH is centered in that mission,
Yeah.
driven by extraordinary creative people, and hopefully, it's a place where people can feel really proud that they're really part of it.
Yeah, create some of the magic. What do you personally look for in the people you invest in and hire at GBH?
That's a great question. When I'd say two things in particular I'm always on looking out for is fundamentally is curiosity.
Mm,
I just, when I'm interviewing someone and talking with them about their interest in GBH and the way they approach work, hearing about problems they've solved, the way they were curious about problem solving, and then also just the range of their other interests outside of work.
yeah,
If they're curious about the world, then they've got a big wide palette, then they're going to bring that into work alongside other people, and that creates a bigger bouillabaisse for everybody.
yeah.
And the other thing, I mean, I use a phrase that with my colleagues, I call it, I talk about headroom hires. So one of the things that you're looking for is you can find someone who's just perfect for the job as you know it today.
Yeah,
But, the world's changed so fast on us. How much headroom is there how much upside is there in the person you're hiring? And that
yeah,
ties to curiosity and energy and problem
sure.
solving and analytical ability and drive and teamwork. But if they're a headroom hire, it works both ways. It's good for the company because you're getting best athlete available, right? And
Right.
but you're also a headroom hire is somebody who, then it's a challenge for the organization, because if they're as good as you hope they are, creating a growth opportunity for them and imagining how they're going to move through the organization, what's next for them, and
Yeah,
creating a kind of career path. There's the win, right? Because
yeah.
because when somebody's coming in
It's
and
a fit.
yeah, it's fit, and it's also
Yeah,
when somebody's coming in and interviewing, and you can evidence that people have grown with the company, then that's a better bet for them than thinking it's
yeah.
just a stop along the way.
Awesome. Well, John, we're just about out of time, but we always ask our guests one last question, and that's, what kind of career and life advice would you give to someone who maybe has their eyes on the corner office, or like you, maybe knows that, a commitment to a career of public service is something they want to do, but maybe they're not sure about that, and they've experimented with a couple of different things. What would you tell that 20-year-old that's looking at their career to move forward?
Well, I mean, I'd say two things. One is no decision you make is irrevocable, right?
Mm,
So giving yourself the latitude to try things, and you'll have a hypothesis about what could work for you, and so try it.
find out the stuff you don't like to
Yeah,
do when you're young,
and
right? Yeah,
I think we all learn that in life. So it's okay. Every decision, you know, sometimes the decisions that are the tough ones that you learn the hardest lessons from are the ones that stick with you the longest.
yeah,
And the other thing
yeah,
I would say, just from my own experience, maybe it's just my luck. Try to listen. Try to think back, whether it was in school or jobs you had or relationships you had. Just what sings to you?
mm,
What aspects of working are important to you?
yeah,
And
yeah,
depending on your personality and what you take from work, do you love being around creative people? Are
yeah.
do you want to be around a vibrant team culture? Do you want to be are you deeply analytical and you want to be a problem solver?
Or do you like working in a cubicle, which is fine. There's
Yeah,
a lot of people that get to
yeah.
do that too.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. Everyone's got a kind of a fit with their, passions and the things that move them, and just try to listen, look back and with head and heart, try to figure out the things um, that drive you. And if you can find enough of that and match that to work where you can feel good about your work, I know that's very true in the social enterprise sector. So, yeah.
Well, Jon Abbott, President and CEO of GBH, thank you so very much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.